Hello, before I start the video, I just wanted to thank everybody for all the support recently, as the channel just hit 50 subscribers and is rapidly approaching 60. It means a lot, and I am very grateful for everyone that has decided to watch, like, comment, and subscribe. With that being said, now let's get back to the scheduled program. Formula 1 is a glamorous sport that blends together speed, endurance, power, and elegance. And while a car is often judged on its performance, fans often remember cars from decades before based on the livery it sported. As a result, in this video, I'll rank my top 3 Ferrari F1 liveries from each decade, all the way from 1950 to the 2010s, but we'll skip the 2020s as only 3 cars have been produced so far. This video will be ranking them solely on liveries and looks only, not the actual car performance, so a car from the 1950s that maybe didn't have a lot of success might be a lot higher than one that won a world championship. The 1950s era of Formula 1 was one of great danger and rather simple car designs, as Formula 1 had little safety precautions. With that being said, there's something rather beautiful about the simple and sleek designs of the cars from this era that really make them stand out, and their different shape is almost unrecognizable from what we see today. For me, the third best car from the 1950s era of Ferraris was the Ferrari 246. This car ran from 1958 to 1960 and was driven by many different drivers, but mainly Phil Hill, Wolfgang von Trips, Mike Horn, and Tony Brooks. In 25 total races, this car had 5 wins and 7 pole positions, and was good enough for Mike Hawthorne to win a world championship in 1958. For me, this era had some of the least differences between the cars, and the cars ran for multiple years, which made it a little bit difficult to find vast differences between the cars and to really rank the top 3. However, with that being said, I think what made me put this car in the top 3 was mainly the front air intake shape, as it's not too big and still looks relatively sleek. I also really like the clear, black, and in some cases red hood scoop, with the exposed exhaust running along the side. That I like the really raw look from like the 1950s and 60s cars, and the exposed engines and exhausts I find really nice. For me, they also make the car look dangerous and fast, as I imagine this area being. I also really like the white circle and black number on the front, as in some of the older versions they don't have this, as some of the older cars have like an off-centered or off-kilter number, where it'll just be like a plain white number on the front and the side, so I think the white and black pops really well. My second favorite car from the 1950s era Ferraris was the Lancia Ferrari D50. This car ran from 1956 to 1957, and like the 246, was driven by a handful of drivers, but most notably by Juan Manuel Fangio, Peter Collins, Luigi Musso, and Mike Hawthorne. And Juan Manuel Fangio even piloted the car to a world championship in 1956. I love the overall shape of this chassis, and especially the 2 protective pieces that seem to protect exposed exhausts on the sides. For me, this looks like very early forms of side pods that we see on F1 cars today. I could see this being a real negative to some, but I like that it looks different from the other 50s era cars. This era also has more noticeable differences between each race, and I appreciate that for different Grand Prix, the front and nose of this car was painted yellow, green, and even a yellow and blue striped version. In addition, they also had a yellow version of the car, which was surprisingly the Ferrari, not the Lancia, but I think that looks very sharp as well. And my favorite car from the 1950s was the Ferrari 500. This car ran from 1952 to 1953 and was driven most notably by Alberto Ascari, Giuseppe Farnia, Pietro Taruffi, Mike Hawthorne, and Luigi Villoresi. In addition, it was also the car in which Alberto Ascari won his 2 Drivers' World Championships, both in 1952 and 1953. For me, this car takes the cake from the 50s, as it is a good combination of simplicity and uniqueness, as the car is as traditional as it gets, with a simple nose shape and an iconic sloped back end. While the car also is sporting a huge exhaust that runs along the left side of the chassis and ends just past the rear wheel. For me, I always love to see an exposed exhaust, especially in the older cars, as I like the raw look, so that would always be a win for me, I guess. Ultimately, the color is almost always going to be red with a Ferrari, but the overall shape and simplicity makes this car the leader for me. The 1960s was a big step in Formula 1 car design. as this decade saw the front engine be replaced with mid and rear engine cars. As a result, the cars would slowly start to look like the cars we're more used to seeing today, with rear wings, front wings, side pods, and so on. But the 60s was a big step in this. The third place car for me in the 60s is the Ferrari 158. This car ran from 1964 to 1965 and was piloted by Lorenzo Bandini, John Surtees, and Nino Vaccarella. This car won the Constructors' Championship in 1964, and John Surtees won the Drivers' Championship with the Ferrari 158 the same year. This car makes my 60s top 3 because of both of its shape and its sleek design. This is the first of all Ferrari F1 cars to have been significantly lower to the ground, and with a newly added mid-engine, it looks small and fast. In addition, this car is one of the only Ferrari F1 cars to have raced in a non-red livery, as in the US and Mexican Grand Prix, they sported a white and blue livery as a protest concerning arguments between Ferrari and the Italian motorsport body regarding the amalgamation of a new mid-engined Ferrari race car. This makes this car extremely unique, and I really like the blue and white livery, even if it was done only in protest. My second favorite car from the 1960s is the Ferrari 312, which raced from 1966 to 67 and was driven by Lorenzo Bandini, Mike Parks, Ludovico Scarviotti, and John Surtees. This car may not have won either the Constructors' or Drivers' Championship, but was still a two-time race winner as both came in the 1966 season. This car really stood out to me as it has a sleek nose and a small air intake in the front, which I really appreciate. Also, the shape is really simple, and with the big rear tires, it looks like the prototypical 60s Formula car. I also really appreciate the exposed exhaust, as I have of other cars already mentioned, and the partially exposed engine in the rear, as it gives the car a raw and almost dangerous look to it, which I appreciate with some of the older cars, as I've always found that to be kind of the biggest takeaway I had with those cars before. The number one car, in my opinion, from the 1960s is the next generation of Ferrari 312, the Ferrari 312-67, which raced from 1967 to 1968. This car was piloted by the same drivers as before, but with the addition of Andrea D. Adamich, Jackie Ickx, Derek Bell, and Jonathan Williams. This car was also a one-time race winner. The reason I have this iteration over the last one is almost exclusively because the exposed engine and the exhaust is larger and more exposed in the back of this version. The liveries themselves look quite similar, but I think that the change made this version look more aggressive, and I personally like that better from this shape and era of Formula 1 cars. Other than that, there isn't really much that stands out from this, so I could, whether it was this version of the 312 or the regular 312, both would be 1 and 2, but that order could be switched depending on kind of personal preference. Now on to the 1970s, where the cars shift again, towards designs and shapes more similar to what we see today, but with some very unique differences, as we start to see front and rear wings, but a lot less defined than what we're used to seeing today. My third favorite Ferrari from the 1970s is the Ferrari 312B3-73 from 1973. This iteration of Ferrari was piloted by Jackie Ickx and Arturo Mercado. Unfortunately, this car was unable to get a single podium in the 73 season, with 3 fourth-place finishes throughout the season. This car made my 70s top 3 because of the overall shape of the body and how it works with the front wing, as any pictures from the front really pop, as the red car with the white and black number and the silver front wing looks really nice to me. As well, the overall shape of the cockpit and how it protrudes from the body looks nice from the front as well. I also really like the silver back wing, as it provides a nice contrast from the rest of the car. Coming in at second from the 70s is the Ferrari 312B-2 from 1971 to 1973. This car was piloted by Mario Andretti, Nanni Galli, Jackie Ickx, Arturo Mercado, and Clay Regazzoni, and was a winner in 2 races in 1971. While I like how the cockpit is shaped better on the 312B3 previously mentioned, I think the white and red front and back wings look a little sharper, especially with the white and black numbers on the front and side of the car. In addition, I love the exposed bit of engines on the rear of the car, and that is for the most part what separates the two for me. I also really like the white part of the white engine cover on both the B2 and B3, as I find it contrasts nicely with the red. But I find that the consistency of white periphery parts on this vehicle makes it look even better than the previous. My favorite 70s Ferrari is the Ferrari 312T from the 1975-76 seasons, which was piloted by Niki Lauda and Clay Regazzoni. This car won the 1975 and 76 Constructors' Championships, and Niki won the 1975 Drivers' Championship behind the wheel of this car. For me personally, I think the iconic nature of seeing this car with Niki's red helmet and the large white air intake with the green and red stripes on it is part of the reason why I have this car in first for the decade, as I think it's an iconic part of Formula 1 history. I think that the very tall air intake actually doesn't look too bad, even though I think it looks a little silly compared to the rest of the car. However, where this car shines is how the side pods and cockpit flow together with one another, as the car looks sleek and fast, with the ever so slight white stripe that slants forward. I also like the silver front and back wing, as it provides some nice contrast to the massive white air intake. Overall, I view this car as an iconic one in the history of Formula 1, and is the car that pops into my head when I think of Niki Lauda, which for sure adds some points for me. The 1980s overall was an iconic time in Formula 1 history, from the McLaren livery to the battles between Prost and Senna. This era is often one that sticks out in the minds of Formula 1 fans as a bit of a golden age of Formula racing. From the 1980s, my third favorite Ferrari was the Ferrari 156-85 from the 1985 season. This car was driven by Michael Alboreto, René Arnoux, and Stefan Johansson, and was a two-time race winner with Alboreto. The 1980s Ferrari liveries stand out to me as some of the nicest from the decade, and especially the late 80s style, as the cars had a simple red and black livery, but that, mixed with the huge tires, really stood out to me. This car is my third favorite, as it is the first that had a simple rear wing, while the others from the earlier iterations had split wings and weird-shaped double back wings that in my opinion didn't look that great. I really like the steep slope on the engine cover in this iteration, as it makes the car look very long and sleek, and the black wings on the late 80s cars really contrast nice with the simple red livery. My second favorite car from the 80s is the Ferrari F1-87 from the 1987 season. This car was driven by Michael Alboreto and Gerhard Berger, and was 2 times a race winner by Gerhard Berger. This car beats out the 85 version, as the cockpit comes up a tad higher, and I think it flows better with the rest of the car. In addition, while I like the steep engine cover from the 85 version, the 87 is a little less steep, and I do think it looks better overall, as I think the car looks a little bit shorter, which I actually like a little bit better. Overall, the 80s look doesn't change too much, as once they had their design with the solid red and black front and rear wings, they didn't really change it too much. So a case could be made for the 85 car over this car. My favorite car from the 80s is the Ferrari 640 from the 1989 season, which was piloted by Gerhard Berger and Nigel Mansell, in which Mansell won 2 races and Berger got 1 victory. This car tops the rest from the 80s for a number of reasons, the first of which being the shape of the car. The side pods, for the first time in a decade, has that iconic 90s circular curved shape, which gives them that car an iconic look. In all honesty, for me, I think that is the perfect shape for a Formula 1 car in terms of aesthetic, as I think the simplicity in the bodywork looks really great. The back engine cover and the headrest are also so iconic, as this general shape really molded what F1 cars look like for the next decade, and for that reason, I had to put it at number 1. The 90s really built on the shape that ended the 80s, and really saw some great technological developments, with teams like Benetton's less than legal launch control, Williams suspension, and so on. With these technological developments, the general shape remained nearly the same, but the cars became more aerodynamically polished. My third favorite car from the 90s is the Ferrari F93A from 1993, which was piloted by Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger. While not particularly successful for a Ferrari, the car was able to get 3 podiums throughout the season. The F93A made my top 3 because Ferrari tried something a little different with the livery here, as they added a large white stripe that wraps around the cockpit and runs to the back of the car. I also really like how the Marlboro ad has the driver name within it just behind the cockpit. However, it isn't really big enough to see from great distance. I also really liked how the front nose of the car lifts up a bit from the wing, as many of the 80s cars saw the wing attached on the side of the nose. I think this looks a lot sleeker and overall is more aesthetically appealing. Overall, I think this car is a nice mix of uniqueness and traditional Formula 1 style. It's a shame that they weren't better this season, because it's not a Ferrari I've seen too much before making this video. My second favorite car from the 90s is the Ferrari F300 from 1998. This car was driven by Eddie Irvine and Michael Schumacher, and while not a championship car, Schumacher did pilot this vehicle to six wins throughout the season. I have this car in second for the decade, as I really like the move to the higher, more aerodynamic nose, with the front wing running underneath. I feel like that front nose shape is so iconic when looking at Ferrari's Formula 1 cars, as that shape stayed fairly true throughout the years of Schumacher dominance in the early 2000s. Another reason I have this car as the second nicest of the 90s for Ferrari is that all-red livery of the Marlboro ads on the engine cover and the back wing. Now the last car had this to some degree, but I think it just looks better in this iteration, and for me this look is very nostalgic, as I remember staying at my grandparents', waking up early to watch Formula 1 races on Sundays, and seeing Ferrari cars that looked and felt like that. My favorite car from the 90s is the Ferrari F399 from 1999, which was driven by Eddie Irvine, Mika Salo, and Michael Schumacher, and was a 6-time race winner, as Schumacher won 2 races and Eddie Irvine won 4. This car was also a constructor's winner, and perhaps could have been a championship car if Schumacher did not break his leg. Admittedly, these two cars are very similar in design and in shape, and in my opinion, it's really a toss-up as to which would be first or second for the decade. For me, what made the difference was the lack of small winglets that were added in the 1998 version on some tracks. These winglets rose up off the side pods and in my opinion were quite the eyesore. On the 1999 version, the F399, I did not see this to the same degree. While it had small winglets just in front of the rear tires, it's much smaller and less noticeable. The late 90s and early 2000s Ferraris is almost the perfect formula car in my opinion, so some of the years here I feel like I'm grasping at straws to decide what I like slightly more than others. So I'd gladly read any comments as your opinion on these rankings as well. The 2000s saw Ferrari dominance, technical and aerodynamic developments, beautiful cars, and for me is perhaps the most nostalgic era of Formula 1. My third favorite car from the 2000s is the Ferrari F2007 from, unsurprisingly, the 2007 season. This car was piloted by Felipe Massa and Kimi Räikkönen, and was both the Constructors' Champion and the World Champion, as Kimi won his world title with this car. While some of the early 2000s Ferraris will be higher on this list, I really like the look of this car, and more specifically, the mid to late 2000 cars, as they had so many little aerodynamic pieces, and while some may think that this crowds the body, I personally really like the look. I also love the lower front nose/wing area of this car, and specifically how the wing swoops down and has the little bits on top that swoop up. I think this combination of sloped nose creates a very visually appealing look. In addition, I've always been a fan of the barcode style Marlboro logo after the cigarette company ban. I'm not sure it would be the most popular look, but overall I think it looks quite nice on this car. My second favorite car from the 2000s is the Ferrari F2004 from the 2004 season. This car was driven by Rubens Barrichello and Michael Schumacher, and was both a Constructors' and Drivers' Championship car, with Michael Schumacher winning the title that season. I love the early 2000s F1 cars, and the Ferrari has always been high on that list, and I'm sure is high on the list of many others. I personally really like the shape of these cars, as they are the perfect mix of simple and technical, with a fairly simple base design, with many little aerodynamic pieces throughout. I think what puts this car ahead of the 2007 car is the white section on the front half of the car, which I think adds some much needed contrast, and I think the Vodafone ad in the middle of the car looks really great with the rest of the livery. My favorite Ferrari from the 2000s is the Ferrari F2003 GA from the 2003 season. This car was piloted by Rubens Barrichello and Michael Schumacher, and like the 2004, was both the Constructors' and Drivers' Champion, with Schumacher winning the title. This car needs no introduction, as in my opinion, this is a top 5 F1 car of all time. While admittedly not that much different from the 04, the Ferraris of this era are just so nostalgic for me that either the 04 or the 03 had to be the winner of the decade. These two cars are almost identical, so I think for me, what played most into my decision was the memories of watching this car battle it out with the BMW Williams of Juan Pablo Montoya that season. The 2010s is the decade in which I started watching Formula 1 again, as I got reinvested in the sport, and while some of the cars of the decade are not favorably looked at, and the V6 hybrids are not particularly popular, it has brought some great racing and some very fast cars. My third favorite car from the 2010s is the Ferrari F1 50 from 2011. This car was driven by Fernando Alonso and Felipe Massa, and was a one-time race winner with Fernando Alonso. This car takes the third spot for the 2010s because of a few reasons, the first of which being the front nose, as it comes straight out and sits much taller than the front wing, which I actually like. I really like the drop wings from the early 2010s, and I think that the arms that connect the nose and wing looks really good in the all-white. In addition, I like the rear wing with the red along the white rear wing with the red along the sides. I think for any Ferrari livery, how they use white, black, or silver really makes a livery, and in this case, it's done quite well. In second from the 2010s is the Ferrari SF16-8 from the 2016 season. This car was driven by Kimi Räikkönen and Sebastian Vettel, and was on the podium 11 times that season. The SF16-H makes my top 3, as I personally think that the car is quite nice. To start, I really like the front nose with the little air channels on either side, and the small Italian flag behind the Ferrari logo. I think that's a nice little addition and a nice touch. I also really like the white air intake behind the driver's head. It is reminiscent of the 1970s cars, which I touched on earlier, and I like the little touch of adding green and red there as well. I also really appreciate the white swoop that runs along the sides of the cockpit, as I think that gives the car a little more style than some of the all-red designs that we've seen in other past cars and that will be present in future cars, because that's kind of Ferrari's shtick. And lastly, my favorite car from the 2010s is the SF90 from the 2019 season. This car was driven by Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel, and was a 3-time race winner, twice coming with Seb and once with Charles. I really liked the decision to go with the matte finish with the car. I remember not being the biggest fan of it when it first came out, but I think the more I see the car, and as I've looked through every Ferrari livery in making this video, the more I can appreciate a change. I also like the black accents throughout the car, as it goes really well with the black halo. And speaking on the halo, I really like the choice to make the halo black in this version, as the previous years was red, and I think adding some contrast really helps. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it to be informative and entertaining. I know this is something a little bit different than most of my other videos, but if you enjoyed, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting. Have a great day.